morning, people. I hope you're doing well, my lovelies, so let me bring you an offering. Though, I warn you, it may contain science. And moss. It doesn't just grow on the north side of trees. In fact, in the southern hemisphere, it's more likely to preferentially grow on the south side of trees. It's because moss likes shade, and in the northern hemisphere, the north gets the fewest direct sunlight hours, in the southern hemisphere, it's the south. So I guess what I'm really saying is, do not navigate by moss in a shady forest, and if you're going to tag with moss graffiti, find a nice spot with indirect sunlight and corporate disapproval. Still, busting that moss on trees, miss, that's science classic, and we're here with fresh moss science, brought to us by Nature Geoscience. First, though, a review. What actually is moss? Moss are flowerless plants with itty-bitty leaves that are only 1 cell thick. They're among the most ancient configurations of plant. In fact, a whole bunch of them are ancient enough to not even have a vascular system like plants with, stems and such do. Bonus. That means moss isn't going to do any of that cavitation-based ultrasonic screaming. Moss is the quiet type. But moss is a quiet type that makes big contributions according to this absolutely ginormous study of soil mosses. Using soil samples from 123 sites from all the continents of the world, this study determined the conditions where mosses thrive globally, and they compared bare soils to those covered by moss versus traditional vascular plants to figure out what kind of contributions mosses make to soil health and how that contribution matches up to trad plants. So first off, where do moss? I mean, where don't moss? Am I right? This map was built by analyzing what environmental factors positively correlated with rich moss cover at the 123 sample sites, then extrapolating based on environmental conditions around the world. Moss liked these conditions here. There are also conditions like these over there. Moss would probably like those too. On this map, purple is very mossy, orange pretty mossy, blue less so, and yellow less so, blue not really that moss. The white parts of the map here aren't no moss zones, but rather places whose environment was not well approximated by our sample sites. Samples taken near coastal Nigeria are wildly different environment than southern Algeria. But then again, I think we can reasonably suspect the Sahara has minimal moss. As for other outliers like Southeast Asia, we might suspect they don't have much moss either for an entirely different reason. So let's get into not just where moss, but why moss. According to this study, mosses dominate in places with low daytime temperatures and without lots of rainfall or big seasonal swings in temperature. That means moss is boss in ecosystems like tundra and some deserts. So don't think Sahara, think cold deserts like the Gobi, where indeed we see a nice purple splotch of moss friendliness. Moss have 2 traits that contribute to its superiority in these ecosystems. One is that, unlike cells from vascular plants, moss cells don't die when they dehydrate. Like the tardigrades of the plant world, moss will stay alive and simply spring back when rehydrated. The other is that moss gets its plants need water fix from moisture in the atmosphere itself. That means it can thrive in places with low rainfall, which would suck for trad plants that depend on their root systems for most of their moisture. By the same token, it contextualizes why so much of Southeast Asia, Brazil, and Central Africa are kind of meh for moss on this map. They're warm places with lots of rainfall or monsoons. Tiny little moss, with its shallow little root system, cannot hold on to its parking spot in that kind of rainfall, especially not compared to vascular plants with those sturdy root systems. So, not only do mosses get swept away by rainfall in these ecosystems, but even if they could stick around, they're less dominant because they're competing with trad plants for nutrients, because, this is vascular plants' home turf. This is what they're built for, baby! But the truth is, for all I've made this out to be a PvP, plant versus plant, mosses and trad plants can be terrific co-op partners in the right ecosystem. In this map, blue areas reflect the contributions of trad plants as the dominant force on ecosystem services. We'll get into that. Yellow areas, by contrast, are moss boss, and purple are co-op. In fact, where this town is proverbially big enough for the both of us, moss/trad plant co-op benefits both. Trad plant's root system stabilize soil for the itty-bitty moss, while moss contribute to soil health that vascular plants benefit from. This study finds that all that existing literature on all the good things trad plants do for carbon sequestration and soil health, mosses do those too, supporting many different, again, what this paper calls ecosystem services. I don't know why, but that extremely makes moss sound like a plant concierge to me. So, not only do soil mosses support concierge services like improving soil nutrients, I mean, that makes sense all on its own. Moss is biomass. It breaks down into nutrients, all that good stuff. But this study shows a real neat trick that mossy soil has that bare soils don't. Fewer plant pathogens. The authors attribute it to the additional soil carbon, that there's less microbial competition in the mossy soil than bare soil taken from the same sample site. And when there's less competition, there's less of a microbe-on-microbe evolutionary arms race. That means that the microbes from mossy soil have evolved fewer highly antibiotic-resistant genes, because remember, antibiotic resistance isn't just a product of human pharmacology, but also of microbial competition. Antibiotic resistance is their defense system against their fellow microbes, right? It just happens that their defensive advantage against their microbial brethren can be a pain in the human tuchus sometimes when we need them to be, not antibiotic resistant. Vascular plants also have this effect on soil pathogen, but it's one of the areas where this study shows mosses don't just match trad plant contributions, but actually exceed them. Soil mosses are even pretty solid carbon storage systems, sequestering as much as 6.3 gigatons more carbon in their soils compared to bare soil alone. Now, yeah, that might not seem like much compared to the 450 to 650 gigatons of carbon sequestered in vegetation globally, but when you think of the mass of moss compared to the mass of big old trad plants, moss is pretty powerful pound for pound. And again, moss can go where trad plants don't thrive, meaning that moss can sequester that carbon in places where otherwise you'd just have bare soil. So, what do we take away from this? That moss is cool? Yes, that should absolutely be the takeaway. Smaller studies have looked at the mechanisms by which mosses improve their local ecosystem services. And there have even been national-level surveys like this one, but this study is the first to map the contributions of soil moss on a global scale, and that lets us draw larger conclusions not about what mosses do in this ecosystem or that ecosystem, but by comparing a whole bunch of different soil moss environments, draw conclusions about what mosses can do in ecosystems writ large, and where they can thrive. We know that they can flourish in places trad plants can't, and now we can make educated guesses about what kind of environments will let us just add moss to improve soil outcomes and increase our plant-based carbon sink. And who knows? Maybe in future studies, they'll sample the sides of megacorp buildings. I bet moss loves that.